They thought the ridge was empty. No movement, no sound, no resistance. What they didn't see was Specialist Kiera Vance, 19 years old, alone and already locked in. Her breath was steady while the battlefield burned behind her. Tanks smoldered in the valley below, smoke climbing into the cold mountain air. Every exit was covered, every mistake already calculated. She wasn't supposed to be here. She definitely wasn't supposed to survive what was coming. The scope settled, the wind shifted, and in that single second, one decision would change how this operation was remembered forever. But the report never mentioned what almost went wrong. Stay with the story because what happens next is why her name was buried instead of celebrated. 84 hours earlier, the dust motes danced in the harsh, buzzing fluorescent light of the recreation tent. The air inside FOB Sentinel was a dense mixture of stale sweat, instant coffee grounds, and the metallic tang of diesel fuel from the constant generators just outside the canvas walls. The temperature had dropped to 43 degrees overnight, that knife-edge cold of late October in Helmand Province that cut through every layer. Specialist Kiera Vance sat on a hard plastic chair, her posture ramrod straight, trying to make herself as small and invisible as the fine grit that coated every surface in this place. The texture of the plastic seat was rough beneath her worn fatigues. Around her, 22 Marines shifted and muttered, their voices a low, rumbling tide of frustration and exhaustion. They were all focused on the front of the tent where Staff Sergeant Dalton Brennan stood beside a tactical map. His face seemed permanently set in hard lines, carved deeper by 18 months of carrying a particular kind of grief. He was wrapping up the mission brief for tomorrow's forward operation, his voice carrying that flat authority of a man who'd stopped expecting good news. The light hum from the overhead bulbs seemed to accentuate the tension in the room. "All right, listen up." Brennan's gaze swept across the faces, stopping momentarily on the small figure near the back. "This isn't a milk run. The AO is hot, and we're looking at heavy resistance patterns. Intelligence says they're massing." He paused, his expression hardening as he looked directly at Kiera. "Which means every man needs to pull his weight. No liabilities." A few chuckles rippled through the gathered soldiers. Brennan's gaze lingered on Kiera, heavy with dismissal, the kind that didn't need words to communicate exactly what he thought. "Vance, you're on RTO duty. Stay back at the wire, monitor the net, stay out of the way." His words weren't just orders. They were an insult delivered with the clear insinuation that she was a coward, too soft for the real fight, too small to matter when the bullets started flying. A Marine named Private First Class Reed Whitmore, sitting near the front, let out a loud, derisive snort. The sound echoed off the canvas, mixing with the distant thrum of a helicopter rotor spinning up on the far side of the compound. Kiera's jaw tightened imperceptibly, a subtle micro-expression that only she felt. She forced her eyes down to the stack of communications manuals on the makeshift plywood table in front of her. The rough canvas wall behind her felt stiff and dry against her back, smelling faintly of mildew and sand. Her heart hammered a quiet, rebellious rhythm against her ribs. She was used to the judgment, the easy dismissal based on her size, and the quiet nature she'd carefully cultivated. But it still stung like sand in an open wound, that particular kind of pain that came from being invisible for all the wrong reasons. Real stories, real courage, these are the moments that define us. Specialist Kiera Vance was 19 years old, an age where most of her peers back home in rural Georgia were navigating community college classrooms and weekend jobs at the Piggly Wiggly. Here, 7,000 miles away in the unforgiving landscape of Afghanistan, she was navigating a world built for bigger, louder, more imposing figures. Assigned as a radio telephone operator with Delta Company, 1st Battalion, 8th Infantry, her primary duty was to maintain communications and stay alive. something the men around her clearly felt was a generous assignment for someone of her build. At 5'3" and barely 115 pounds of tightly coiled muscle and sinew, she contrasted sharply with the battle-hardened soldiers who filled the tent. Her fatigues, while standard issue, always seemed cleaner than everyone else's, a detail that earned her quiet disdain. They saw fastidiousness, she saw discipline. They saw a quiet, soft-spoken demeanor. She saw the silence of absolute focus. She had a habit, an involuntary tic born of years of practice, of automatically scanning every room she entered. Her eyes would trace invisible lines of sight, identifying choke points, exit routes, and always, always the highest available ground. It was an instinct so deeply ingrained she rarely even thought about it anymore. The men in Delta Company just thought she was nervous, easily spooked. They attributed her constant watchfulness to fear, not experience. Her hands, small and slender, were a contradiction in terms. The palms were smooth, almost soft, but the tips of her fingers and the base of her right thumb had specific, hardened calluses, the kind formed from thousands of hours of delicate interaction with a single-stage trigger and fine adjustments on a parallax dial. They were not the rough, shredded calluses of a heavy machine gunner or a combat engineer. She kept them hidden in her pockets most of the time. No one noticed. Or if they did, they didn't care enough to ask questions. Inside her head, the internal monologue was a fortress she rarely allowed anyone near. She had one ally in the company, Corporal Flynn Mackenzie, a kind-eyed communications specialist with a faint Scottish burr in his voice, and a family history that traced back to immigrant grandparents in Boston. He treated her with basic human respect, which in this environment felt like genuine kindness. But even Flynn didn't know the truth of her past. She had wiped the slate clean upon this transfer, burying a previous life under layers of paperwork and deliberate silence. Short, sharp memories would sometimes breach the surface of her controlled calm. A flashback to her grandfather's cabin deep in the Appalachian Mountains, where the air smelled of pine resin and gun oil and wood smoke. The feel of cold steel against her cheek as he taught her the most crucial lesson of all, his weathered hands steady on the stock. Patience, Kira girl. The shot is the easy part. It's the waiting that separates pretenders from professionals. She had learned the discipline of the wait, the silence of the observation post, the stillness that came from absolute certainty long before she ever wore a uniform. She had learned how to be unseen, not just how to hide behind cover. Those lessons had been her anchor when her grandfather passed 3 years ago, leaving her with a quiet void that she tried to fill with purpose and precision. She suppressed these thoughts now, focusing only on the buzzing fluorescent light and the concrete floor beneath her boots. She had only done what was required to blend in here at FOB Sentinel, to get by without drawing attention. She didn't lead the morning runs. She came in just within the time limit, never first, never last. She kept her uniform clean and pressed. She spoke only when spoken to, and even then, only the minimum required. She was a ghost in the machine. And the men around her saw only what they expected to see, an easily dismissed girl who was clearly in over her head. Probably here because of some diversity initiative, definitely not someone who belonged on the front lines. They saw the quiet and mistook it for weakness. They saw her size and assumed an absence of strength. They were about to learn how catastrophically wrong they were. The mess tent incident happened on a Tuesday morning, 3 days before everything changed. Kira was cleaning the spilled coffee from the concrete floor, her hands moving in practiced, efficient motions. The large Marine who had bumped her, Private First Class Reed Whitmore, hadn't even paused to offer a standard apology. He just sneered down at her, his voice carrying easily in the echoing metal building. "Watch where you're going, little girl. You're always in the damn way." A few heads turned. Smirks formed on weathered faces, that casual cruelty that came from boredom and too much time in the same place with the same people. Kira didn't look up. She simply finished cleaning the mess, wrung out the rag into a bucket, and moved on. The easy judgment rolling off her back like water off a duck, at least on the surface. Inside, though, it simmered. She thought of her grandfather's words again, spoken on a cold November morning when she was 14 and furious at a teacher who dismissed her. Patience in the face of the storm, Kira. Let them underestimate you. It's the only advantage small people get, and it's a bigger advantage than they'll ever understand. But this wasn't a hunt in the Georgia mountains. This was survival among people who were supposed to be her own. Later that week, a different kind of confrontation flared in the humid interior of an up-armored Humvee during a convoy briefing. The air felt thick, oppressive, the breathing of 6 soldiers heavy in the confined space. The smell of sweat and gun oil and the chemical tang of CLP mixed into something almost suffocating. Kira sat in the back, the RTO gear humming softly beside her hip. The standard patrol route involved crossing a valley that had recent reports of sporadic communications jamming, the kind of sophisticated interference that suggested organized opposition rather than random insurgents. Staff Sergeant Brennan was going over the primary communications plan, his finger tracing the route on a laminated map. "We hit the valley floor, we go to Channel Alpha," he instructed, his tone allowing no questions. "Standard protocol. It's worked for 6 months." Kira spoke up softly, a rare break in her carefully maintained silence. "Staff Sergeant, I picked up some chatter on the net last night." Her voice was quiet but clear. "They were discussing localized jamming equipment near the eastern ridgeline. Maybe we should prep Channel Bravo as the primary backup, not secondary." The Humvee went silent for a moment, the only sound the idle of the diesel engine vibrating through the frame. Brennan turned his head slightly, giving her a look of pure, patronizing dismissal, the kind reserved for children who speak out of turn. "Specialist Vance, stick to the operations manual. Alpha has worked fine for half a year. We don't need your improvising based on chatter you probably misunderstood." The other soldiers shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their weapons or their boots, avoiding eye contact with either of them. Kira immediately retracted, a quiet acceptance settling over her posture like a familiar coat. "Yes, Staff Sergeant." The conversation moved on. The decision was made. Later that day, when the convoy hit the valley floor, communications failed completely. The primary net was dead air, just static and the occasional burst of fragmented noise. It was chaos for almost 4 minutes until the secondary channel was hastily activated, exactly the frequency Kira had suggested. The communication issues were precisely where she had predicted, centered around the eastern ridgeline. No one mentioned her suggestion afterward, but a few glances were exchanged in the Humvee on the return trip, quick looks that said more than words. The silence was heavy with unspoken thoughts, with the beginning of doubt about assumptions they'd held as certainties. The physical training ground offered the third and perhaps most frequent opportunity for casual judgment. Kira pushed herself during the mandatory morning runs, but never to the front of the pack. She always finished within the required time limit, her lungs burning, her legs heavy, but never with enough margin to draw attention. She didn't want anyone looking too closely at her actual physical capabilities. After one particularly grueling 6-mile run in full kit, Reed Whitmore loped up beside her as they approached the finish line, barely winded despite the weight and the pace. "Barely made it again, Vance," he said with a smirk, his voice loud enough for others to hear. "Guess some of us are just built for office work, huh?" She kept her pace steady, focusing on the rough texture of the gravel path under her boots and the metallic smell of morning dew mixing with sweat and dust. She kept her eyes forward, her breathing controlled despite the burn. Inside, she calculated the effort it took to hold back, to not show the endurance that had been forged in much harsher conditions than a morning run in Afghanistan. What would you have done in that moment? When the insults kept coming, when the dismissal felt like a weight on your chest, when every day required swallowing your pride just to maintain the cover you'd built? Kira absorbed them all, building a wall of quiet indifference around herself. It was her armor, thicker than any Kevlar vest, more reliable than any weapon. During a routine gear check in the armory, another layer of doubt surfaced, casual in cutting. The smell of gun oil and metal hung heavy in the air, the sound of tools clicking as soldiers inspected their equipment. The armory was one of the few solid structures on the FOB, concrete walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed with a frequency that set teeth on edge. Kira was tying down a radio pack with a series of precise knots, her fingers moving with an efficiency that came from pure muscle memory, each movement economical and exact. One of the older specialists, a guy named Daniels with a weathered face and 20 years in, leaned over to watch. "That's overkill, Vance. You tying that thing for a parade inspection or something?" His tone was light, almost friendly, but the underlying message was clear. No one's grading you on fancy knots out here. Function over form. The group around them chuckled softly, the sound echoing off the metal racks that lined the walls. Kira finished the knot without a word, testing its hold with a subtle tug that confirmed it would hold under far more stress than anything a parade ground would demand. Internally, she recalled the ropes course from selection, where a loose knot could mean failure or worse, where the instructors would cut your line without warning just to see if you'd tied it properly. She let the comments slide off her, packing her gear away with the same methodical care. The armory felt smaller then, the weight of their casual dismissal pressing in from all sides. But she endured. Visibility wasn't her ally. Not yet. The true cost of being perpetually underestimated was the constant internal battle, the exhausting effort of maintaining two separate realities. She used her thoughts and sensory memories to expand her world beyond the small, judgmental confines of Delta Company. Each dismissal was a reminder of why she had chosen silence over revelation. A small, tightly folded challenge coin remained tucked deep within a secure pocket of her duffel bag, a secret memento never displayed. It bore the insignia of the 75th Ranger Regiment, Sniper Section, and on the back, engraved in tiny letters, SPC K. Vance, Distinguished Graduate, Class 04, 2024. She never looked at it, but she knew exactly where it was, always. During convoys, her eyes continued their silent, practiced sweep of the perimeter, noting elevation changes and natural cover that others overlook completely. The men saw it as paranoia, the nervous scanning of someone who didn't belong. She saw it as preparation, reading terrain the way others read books. The first time FOB Sentinel took indirect fire, mortars landing near the southern barracks at 0300 on a moonless night, the natural instinct for most soldiers was panic. The air filled with the sharp, acrid smell of high explosives, the ground shaking underfoot, the terrible whistle-crump rhythm of incoming rounds. While other junior enlisted flinched and scrambled for the nearest bunker, Kira calmly located the direction of the fire based on sound, identified the most solid piece of cover near her position, and waited, tracking the rhythm of the impacts with the detached precision of someone who'd done this before. They thought she was in shock, frozen in place by fear, but inside her mind was mapping trajectories, estimating range based on the whistle pitch and the delay between launch sound and impact. It was a skill honed in colder, more isolated training ranges, far from this desert heat. The smell of cordite lingered long after the all clear, triggering a memory she pushed down hard. A different kind of range, where failure wasn't an option, and the cost of mistakes was measured in ways that left scars you couldn't see. She shook it off, helping a shaken private to his feet without fanfare, without drawing attention to her own calm. Her stillness was her shield. But it invited more whispers, more assumptions, more certainty that she didn't belong. During a quiet moment in the barracks, as the fluorescent lights flickered and the distant generator hummed its eternal diesel song, Corporal Flynn Mackenzie sat beside her on the edge of a cot. He'd noticed her tracing a faint scar on her right hand, a thin white line that ran along the webbing between thumb and forefinger. It was old, long-heeled, but distinct. "What's that from, Vance?" His accent softened the question, made it sound like genuine curiosity rather than interrogation. She looked up, considered him for a moment, then tucked her hand away. "Kitchen accident back home." She smiled faintly, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. Something like that. But internally, it was a reminder of her first live-fire exercise with the Ranger Sniper section. A recoil burn from a weapon malfunction during a stress test. The burn had been a badge, proof that she'd pushed through when others might have quit. Flynn didn't press, but his curiosity lingered in the air like the dust that never quite settled in this place. The men in Delta Company saw a quiet, soft girl who barely made the cut for deployment. They saw her stillness and confused it with an absence of action, with passivity. They saw her silence and assumed an absence of a story worth telling. They had no idea they were sharing a forward operating base with one of the most lethal assets the U.S. Army had ever trained. The clues were there, hidden in plain sight like a weapon disassembled and scattered among innocent parts, waiting for the right moment to be reassembled, waiting for the moment when hiding would cost more lives than revealing the truth. The high-pressure training exercise was designed to break teams and expose weaknesses. It was called Operation Iron Gate, a simulated hostage rescue deep within enemy-controlled territory. The objective was simple on paper: extract a high-value target from a heavily fortified compound in a mock village 2 kilometers outside the wire. But simplicity on paper meant chaos in execution. The scenario was deliberately intense, pushing communications and coordination to their absolute breaking points. The atmosphere inside the command tent was pure, unadulterated chaos, as multiple teams struggled with competing radio frequencies, sophisticated jamming designed to mimic real-world conditions, and unexpected scenario twists introduced by the training cadre without warning. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and overheating electronics. The hum of generators outside competing with static bursts from a dozen radios, all trying to cut through the interference. Lieutenant Davis, the operation lead, was visibly frustrated, his voice rising to be heard over the din. "We need those coordinates now. The primary comms team is down. Backup is compromised." His voice cracked slightly under the pressure, betraying the weight he felt. "Someone get me a lock on that frequency, or this whole thing is fucked." The primary RTO, a seasoned corporal named Jenkins, with 2 deployments under his belt, was sweating profusely, his hands fumbling with the radio dials like they'd suddenly become foreign objects. His eyes were wide with something approaching panic. The radio in front of him hissed with static and a cacophony of scrambled voices, nothing clear, nothing usable. He looked defeated, his fingers slipping on the controls that he'd operated 1,000 times before. The tent felt smaller by the second, the chaos pressing in from all sides like a physical force. Kira was in the tent merely to deliver a hard copy of a map overlay, a simple courier task that required no skill. She stood in the periphery, watching the systematic failure unfold with growing concern. The noise level, the lack of discipline, the rising panic in voices that should have been calm. It offended her core sense of professionalism in a way that was almost physical. The mission was about to fail, a complete casualty of disorder and inadequate training. And while this was just an exercise, she knew that in 6 weeks or 6 months, this same chaos could cost real lives. She felt a familiar sensation settle over her, that cold detachment that had carried her through Ranger selection, through live-fire exercises where instructors deliberately created chaos to see who would break and who would become calmer under pressure. Her heart rate steadied, her focus sharpened like a lens coming into perfect clarity. Without a word, without asking permission, she moved forward through the crowded tent. The men focused on Jenkins's struggle barely noticed her approach, this small figure in dusty fatigues threading between them. Jenkins glanced up, bewildered, about to protest her proximity to his workspace. But something in her eyes stopped him cold, a calm assurance that cut through his panic like a knife through canvas. She gently but firmly nudged him aside with one hand on his shoulder. He stepped back, confusion etching his features, too overwhelmed to argue. Kira took his place at the communications console, her movements immediate and certain. Her hands moved with blinding practice speed that absolutely belied her quiet demeanor. She didn't reach for the standard field manual that lay open beside the radio, didn't consult the frequency card that Jenkins had been fumbling with. Instead, she started inputting a series of complex keystrokes and dial adjustments, a protocol from an entirely different manual, one not found in basic RTO training. These were techniques from a harsher school, late-night sessions in specialized courses where the standards were absolute and the washout rate was over 60%. She worked in complete silence, her focus absolute, blocking out the yelling and tension like she was alone in the tent. Her fingers danced across the console, adjusting frequencies with surgical precision, entering encryption sequences from memory. The chaotic static began to shift, clarifying like a photograph coming into focus. The scrambling started to unravel, the interference pattern breaking apart under her methodical assault. Suddenly, it locked in. Clean, clear, perfect. A data burst came through, crisp and concise, the coordinates they'd been desperately seeking for the last 8 minutes. "Coordinates coming in now," she said, her voice clear and absolutely flat, cutting through the previous panic like a blade. She read them out without hesitation. North 34 degrees, 12 minutes 45 seconds. East 67 degrees, 54 minutes 32 seconds. Confidence high, verified. The tent fell into a stunned, heavy silence. Lieutenant Davis stared at her like she just materialized from thin air, his expression shifting from stress to complete disbelief. He snatched the coordinates, cross-referenced them against the map with shaking hands. They were perfect, down to the last digit, exactly where the simulated HVT was located. He looked at Kira, his mouth opening and closing before words finally came. Where the hell did you learn that?" he stammered, all his officer composure gone. "That's not standard protocol. That's not even in the advanced manual." The chaos in the room had been replaced by something heavier. Complete silence. Every eye in the tent was now on this small specialist who'd just done what their most experienced RTO couldn't. Kira pulled back instantly, retreating behind her carefully constructed veil of humility like pulling on a familiar coat. She averted her gaze, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle in her sleeve, making herself small again. "From a book, Lieutenant. I read a lot." Her voice was quiet, apologetic almost, as if she'd done something wrong. "Field Manual Annex, Section 7B, I think." It was a complete lie, and she knew it. Section 7B dealt with antenna theory, not frequency-hopping encryption protocols used by special operations. Then she melted back into the shadows of the tent, leaving the officers and NCOs to process the data and the unexpected, jarring competence they just witnessed. The perception had shifted, subtle but undeniable. She wasn't just quiet anymore. She was unexpectedly, disturbingly capable. Whispers started immediately, spreading through the tent like ripples in water. Eyes followed her as she slipped out the canvas door into the bright Afghan sunlight. Jenkins rubbed the back of his neck, glancing at Lieutenant Davis with an expression caught between embarrassment and confusion. The easy dismissal had been replaced by questions. The seed of doubt about their initial judgment had been firmly, irreversibly planted. What else was she hiding? And more importantly, why was someone with those skills working as a basic radio operator? The exercise continued, the mission ultimately succeeding because of those coordinates. But the dynamic in Delta Company had changed in a way that couldn't be undone. The tent remained unnervingly silent in the moments following Kira's simple, inadequate explanation. The coordinates were already being relayed up the chain of command, the simulated operation moving forward. But the atmosphere had fundamentally, irrevocably changed. A new figure entered the scene, his presence immediately commanding attention despite making no sound. Chief Warrant Officer Victor Hale was a man whose quiet authority filled whatever space he occupied. 56 years old, weathered by 3 decades of training soldiers to kill from distances that turned human beings into mathematical problems. He'd walked in just as the murmurs about the book-smart RTO began to spread through the assembled soldiers. He stopped near the radio console, his eyes scanning the equipment, the settings, the frequency display. Then his gaze settled on Kira Vance. She was attempting to busy herself by rolling up the map overlay she'd originally delivered, keeping her head down, trying desperately to disappear again into that comfortable invisibility. Chief Hale tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp, assessing. It was the look of someone matching a face to a legend they'd heard whispered in certain circles. In certain schools where the standards were measured in millimeters and milliseconds. His eyes tracked her posture, the unconscious discipline in how she stood, the economy of her movements. These weren't things taught in basic training. This was something that came from somewhere else entirely, somewhere much harder. He finally spoke, not to her, but across the room to Lieutenant Davis. His voice was low, but it cut through the space like a blade through silk. Specialist Kira Vance, former Surveillance and Target Acquisition, 75th Ranger Regiment, Sniper Section. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Specialist, Kira, Vance, Ranger Regiment, Sniper. Each word landed with the force of physical impact. The casual arrogance that had filled the space for weeks evaporated like water on hot steel. The air suddenly felt still, charged with the electricity of revelation. The 75th Ranger Regiment, Sniper Section. Those weren't just words, they were a standard, a brutal selection process that broke strong men and sent them home. The name commanded instant, absolute respect in any military circle. Reed Whitmore, who'd been leaning against a support pole with his characteristic smirk, slowly pushed himself upright. The smirk was gone, replaced by stunned realization, his face pale beneath his tan. Staff Sergeant Dalton Brennan, standing near the tactical display, visibly stiffened. He adjusted his posture awkwardly, the condescension draining from his expression like someone had opened a valve. A quiet, dawning shame settled over his features. The previous dismissals, the casual cruelty, the easy assumptions, all of it was now being viewed through an entirely different lens, and that lens was unforgiving. Kira didn't react outwardly, but her breath hitched slightly, just once. The only sign that her carefully guarded secret had just been stripped away in front of everyone. She continued rolling the map with that same meticulous precision that now made perfect, terrible sense to everyone watching. The emotion in the tent wasn't loud. It was pure, reverent stillness, the kind reserved for churches in moments when you realized you'd been standing next to someone extraordinary without ever knowing it. The easy judgment was over. Respect had been earned, quietly, in one simple revelation. The room held its breath, waiting for what came next, knowing that everything had just changed in ways they were only beginning to understand. The next morning, the fragile peace of FOB Sentinel was shattered not by an exercise, but by terrifying reality. The perimeter alarms wailed at 0545, a sound that cut deep into the soul, that primal warning that turned blood to ice water. The speakers mounted on every building crackled with urgent voices. Contact! Contact North Wall! Heavy force inbound! The voice over the communications net was tight with barely controlled panic, the kind that came from seeing something that shouldn't be possible, something that made training feel inadequate and survival uncertain. This wasn't a drill. This was the enemy they'd been warned about, the organized force that intelligence had vaguely mentioned in briefings, the disciplined fighters who'd been massing in the mountains. Chaos erupted across the compound in those first brutal seconds. Marines scrambled for gear, the pre-dawn darkness filled with shouting and the metallic clatter of weapons being charged. The smell of adrenaline and fear hung thick in the cold air, mixing with the sharp, acrid scent of burning rubber from a vehicle hit near the main gate. The temperature had dropped to 38 degrees overnight, and breath came out in clouds that looked like gun smoke in the emergency lights. Staff Sergeant Dalton Brennan sprinted past the communications tent, his face set in grim lines, his rifle already up. His gaze caught Kira's for just a second as she emerged from the tent in full kit, radio on her back. The dismissal that had lived in his eyes for weeks was gone, replaced by something else entirely, a desperate question, an acknowledgement of what Chief Hale had revealed yesterday. He didn't give an order, he asked, "What do we need to do, Vance?" The simple question, the use of her name without derision or doubt, was all the authorization she needed, all the permission to stop hiding and start being who she actually was. Her voice was calm, unnervingly steady amidst the gunfire that had already begun crackling from the north wall. "I need the high ground. Water tower. I'll take overwatch position." She spoke with absolute certainty, no hesitation. "You coordinate the defense from the main line. Get everyone organized. I'll handle what I can see." She moved before he could respond, moved with a fluid, lethal grace that no one in Delta Company had ever seen from her before. She sprinted toward the water tower, ignoring the small arms fire that kicked up dust around her boots, rounds snapping past close enough to hear. She'd mapped this route 3 weeks ago during one of her nervous walks around the perimeter. She scaled the rusty metal ladder with frightening ease, each hand placement certain, her body moving like she'd done this 1,000 times before. Once at the top platform, 32 meters above the compound, she dropped prone in a single, smooth motion. Her body automatically assumed the perfect firing position, practiced so many times it was more natural than standing. Through the basic optic mounted on her M4 carbine, she could see the enemy. Disciplined, numerous, moving in coordinated fire teams toward the breach points in the north wall. This wasn't a rabble. This was professional. She could identify their command structure immediately, the officers with distinct communications gear, the team leaders directing the assault with hand signals that showed training. It was a target-rich environment, the kind that separated amateurs from professionals. The first shot was a whisper compared to the battle noise erupting below. The lead demolitions engineer, carrying a satchel charge toward the gate, crumpled without warning. The charges fell harmlessly beside him, unexploded, useless. The second shot came 3 seconds later, taking out the communications officer on the left flank. His radio shattered, the antenna spinning away, their coordination immediately degraded. Kira didn't spray fire like the Marines on the wall. She didn't waste ammunition on suppression. She conserved every single round, using the environment, timing her shots with the rumble of explosions and the rattle of machine gun fire to mask her muzzle signature. She systematically destroyed the enemy's command structure, turning their organized advance into confusion, into hesitation, into the first seeds of doubt. The first target was 380 meters out, wind blowing 7 miles per hour crosswind from the east, temperature 41 degrees and rising with the sun. She made the calculations without conscious thought, muscle memory and training taking over. Her breathing steady at 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out, heart rate dropping to 56 beats per minute. Below, the battle raged with increasing intensity, but the Marines could feel something shifting. The enemy assault faltered. Their momentum broke like a wave against rocks. They were being systematically dismantled by precision fire from an unknown position, and it was breaking their will faster than any artillery barrage could. As the sun broke over the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gray, the enemy began to retreat, dragging their wounded, leaving their dead. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, broken only by the moans of wounded and the crackling of fires. Exhausted, smoke-stained Marines walked past Kiera's position as she descended the ladder, her movements still controlled despite the adrenaline crash that came after combat. There were no cheers, no applause. That wasn't the way this worked. Instead, tired eyes met hers with solemn nods. A few grizzled veterans, men with multiple deployments and scars that told stories, offered quick, sharp salutes. Their respect earned through action, through discipline, through quiet competence that had saved lives. The silence spoke louder than any medal ceremony ever could. Corporal Flynn Mackenzie approached as she reached the bottom of the ladder, his face streaked with cordite residue and sweat despite the cold. 23, he said quietly, his Scottish accent thick with emotion. Confirmed observers counted 23. With that, he gestured at her M4 carbine, a weapon never designed for precision work beyond 300 meters. Kiera didn't respond. She simply checked her weapon, began the automatic post-engagement routine. Clear the chamber. Check for damage. Account for ammunition expenditure. 6 rounds remaining in the current magazine. 4 magazines expended. 114 rounds fired. 23 confirmed. The math was automatic, ingrained, necessary. The days following the battle settled into a strange new normal. A fundamental shift in the atmosphere of FOB Sentinel that everyone could feel, but few could articulate. The respect was a silent language now, spoken in nods in the complete absence of the mockery that had been so casual before. The jokes had stopped. The dismissive comments had evaporated like morning dew. Kiera returned to her duties with that same calm efficiency, but now it was viewed through a lens of awe rather than suspicious doubt. Lieutenant Davis and Chief Warrant Officer Hale approached her on the 3rd day after the battle, finding her in the communications tent, organizing frequency cards with her characteristic precision. The smell of gun oil and electrical equipment filled the small space, sunlight streaming through the canvas in hard white bars. "Specialist Vance," Lieutenant Davis began, his tone formal but respectful in a way it had never been before. "We'd like to discuss your future assignment." Chief Hale stood beside him, arms crossed, his weathered face unreadable, but his eyes sharp and assessing. "We're putting in paperwork for an immediate promotion to sergeant and a transfer to a dedicated sniper position," Davis continued. "Your skills are clearly wasted on basic radio operations. We need you where you can make the most impact." Kiera listened politely, standing in the bright sunlight that reflected off the compound's dust. The air smelled of diesel fuel from the generators and the concrete barriers still being repaired after the assault. She was quiet for a long moment, considering, her fingers absently touching the pocket where she kept Brooks' challenge coin. "I appreciate the offer, sir," she said finally, her voice respectful but firm. "But I'm needed here with Delta Company, as their RTO and, when necessary, their overwatch." Lieutenant Davis blinked, clearly not expecting refusal. "Specialist, you're Ranger qualified, distinguished graduate from sniper school. We're talking about a role that matches your actual capabilities, not hiding," Kiera interrupted gently. "I understand, sir, but my duty isn't about rank or the best utilization of my MOS. It's about the people I watch over. These Marines, this company, they need someone who can do both jobs. And right now, that's me." She met his eyes steadily. "I'm staying put, sir, if that's acceptable." The officers exchanged glances. Chief Hale's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile, respect clear in his expression. "It's your call, Specialist," Hale said quietly. "But understand, you've set a standard now. They'll expect that level of performance every time." "I understand, Chief." No arguments were raised, no pressure applied. They simply nodded and left her to her work, understanding on some level that forcing the issue would be counterproductive. Some warriors chose their own battlefields, and sometimes the right thing was to let them. But the quiet wasn't destined to last. 3 days after the first assault, the intelligence section called an emergency briefing at 2100 hours. The Tactical Operations Center was crowded. the air thick with tension and the electronic hum of radio equipment. Staff Sergeant Brennan stood at the front beside a large tactical map, his arm still in a sling from a minor wound he'd taken during the battle. Chief Hale stood to his left, expression grave. "Listen up," Brennan began without preamble. "S2 has been monitoring enemy communications. The force that hit us wasn't random. They're part of a larger, organized element operating in this valley." He gestured to the map, where red symbols marked enemy positions. "Call sign, the Wolf, former military training, possibly Soviet era. Tactical discipline we haven't seen from local insurgents. Intelligence estimates he's been building this force for 8 months." Corporal Mackenzie, sitting near the front, leaned forward. "How many are we talking about, Staff Sergeant?" "Best estimate, between 280 and 320 fighters. Better equipped than the first wave. Reports of heavy weapons, crew-served mortars, possibly DSHK heavy machine guns." A murmur ran through the assembled soldiers. Those were numbers that could overwhelm the FOB's 73 defenders, even with air support. "When?" someone asked from the back. "Intelligence intercepts suggest within 18 to 24 hours. They're regrouping 9 kilometers north, reinforcing and preparing for a second assault." The room fell silent, the weight of that information settling over them like a physical thing. Brennan's eyes found Kira in the crowd. The enemy commander broadcast a message on open frequency. He paused, something unreadable in his expression. Translated from Pashto, "The American ghost is a worthy opponent. Tomorrow I return with greater force. She will see what real war looks like." Every eye in the room turned to Kira. She sat perfectly still, her face composed, but inside her mind was already working through the tactical problem. A force that size, with heavy weapons, attacking prepared positions. The mathematics of it, the geometry of overlapping fields of fire, the prioritization of targets. After the briefing dispersed, Brennan approached her outside the TOC, the night air cold and clear, stars brilliant in the unpolluted sky. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "We can call in airstrikes, request immediate reinforcements from battalion, artillery support." Kira looked up at the water tower, silhouetted against the stars. "He's baiting me specifically, Staff Sergeant. If I hide, if we rely only on conventional response, he'll adapt. He'll wait. He'll come back when we're weaker, when we've rotated out, when someone else is standing this post." She turned to face him. "This needs to end. Tomorrow. Decisively." Brennan studied her face, seeing something of his son in her eyes, that same absolute certainty that came from knowing your purpose. "What do you need?" "My rifle," she said simply. "My actual rifle. The M110 semi-automatic sniper system that had been damaged sat in the armory, the firing pin bent, still unfixed from whatever had happened to it before the first battle." Brennan had heard rumors, whispers about sabotage, but nothing confirmed. "Consider it done. Anything else?" "Multiple positions. I can't stay static if they're bringing heavy weapons. I'll need 3 prepared hides, ability to move between them." Brennan nodded, already thinking through the logistics. "And Staff Sergeant?" Kira's voice was softer now. "I'll need Mackenzie on communications intercept, and Whitmore on spotting scope if he's willing." Brennan's eyebrows rose. "Whitmore? After what he—" He stopped himself. "Everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst moment," Kira said quietly. "He saved lives during the first assault, even if he doesn't know it yet. I'd rather have him where I can see him, contributing, than eaten alive by his own guilt." It was perhaps the most she'd said about her philosophy, her worldview, in all the weeks she'd been at FOB Sentinel. Brennan nodded slowly. "I'll make it happen." The armory at 0100 hours was quiet, except for the hum of a single fluorescent light and the distant generator. Kira sat at a workbench, the disassembled M110 laid out in front of her with the precision of a surgical kit. The firing pin was indeed bent, a deliberate stress applied at exactly the right point to make it look like wear rather than sabotage. She'd known immediately when she discovered it, 3 hours before the first battle, had known exactly who was responsible, but there had been no time for accusations or anger, only adaptation. Now she replaced the pin with a new one from the armory stock, her fingers moving with practiced certainty. Reassembly, function check, the satisfying click of metal on metal, the smooth action of the bolt. The door opened quietly. Reed Whitmore stood in the entrance, hesitant, his usual bravado completely absent. "Vance, he swallowed hard. "Can I help prep gear?" Kira looked at him for a long moment, seeing past the swagger to the scared young man underneath, someone who'd made terrible choices out of insecurity and fear. She nodded toward the ammunition cans. "Magazine loading, match-grade rounds, sorted by weight variance under .2 grains. Whitmore moved to the bench gratefully, sitting across from her, and began the meticulous work of weighing individual cartridges on the precision scale. They worked in silence for nearly 20 minutes, the only sounds the click of rounds being seated in magazines and the faint electronic beep of the scale. Finally, Whitmore spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I bent your firing pin. Night before the first attack." Kira's hands didn't stop working, didn't even slow. "I know," she said simply. Whitmore's head snapped up. "You knew?" "Firing pins don't bend from normal wear, Reed. The metallurgy doesn't work that way. And I'm not stupid." He flinched at the use of his first name, at the flat certainty in her voice. "I could have gotten everyone killed. I could have gotten you killed. Why didn't you say anything?" Kira set down the rifle, met his eyes directly. "Because in that moment, I had a choice. I could focus on what you'd done, or I could focus on what needed to be done. People were about to die if I didn't adapt." She paused. "You made a mistake out of fear and insecurity. I've made worse mistakes for worse reasons. The difference is what we do after." Whitmore's eyes were wet, his voice choked. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Probably not," Kira agreed. "But you're going to earn it tomorrow. I need you on spotting scope, secondary position. You'll be my eyes on angles I can't see. Can you handle that?" He nodded, unable to speak, understanding that this was both punishment and redemption, that she was giving him the chance to prove himself when he least deserved it. "Don't make me regret trusting you, Reed." "I won't. I swear to God I won't." They returned to loading magazines, but something had shifted between them, some fundamental realignment of respect and understanding. At 0300, Kira climbed to the water tower one more time, not to fight but to observe, to memorize the terrain one final time before dawn brought war. The night was cold and clear, the stars so bright they cast shadows. She could see for miles, the mountains dark silhouettes against the lighter sky, the valley floor a patchwork of compounds and fields. She thought of Brooke, as she always did in the quiet hours. Sergeant Brooke Hartley had been 23, blonde hair always escaping from under her helmet, laugh that could light up a room even in the darkest forward operating base. She'd been Kira's spotter, her best friend, the sister she'd never had. The IED had been buried in a road that Kira had selected for exfiltration after a successful observation mission. Her call, her route, her responsibility. Brooke had died instantly. Kira had walked away with minor shrapnel wounds and guilt that felt like it would crush her chest every time she breathed. She'd requested immediate transfer after that, demotion, anything to get away from the expectations, the looks of pity, the weight of being the one who survived when someone better had died. "I'm sorry I hid, Hermana," she whispered to the night, to the memory, to the ghost that followed her everywhere. "I'm sorry I let fear win for so long. But tomorrow, I promise, I'll be who you always believed I could be." The wind carried her words away into the darkness, and somewhere in her heart, she felt a release, a permission to stop punishing herself and start honoring the memory properly. Below, she could see Brennan and Hale walking the perimeter, checking defensive positions. Mackenzie in the communications tent, headphones on, monitoring enemy frequencies. Whitmore, cleaning weapons in the armory, working with a focus she'd never seen from him. Delta Company preparing for the fight of their lives, and she would be ready. At 0515, 30 minutes before dawn, Kira was already in position Alpha, the water tower platform. Her M110 was set up with the precision of a surgical instrument, bipod locked, scope calibrated, range cards prepared for every likely approach. The weapon felt right in her hands, familiar, an extension of her will. Mental checklist ran automatically. Wind 6 miles per hour southwest. Temperature 49 degrees and rising. Humidity 28%. Barometric pressure steady. 3 magazines of match-grade ammunition, 20 rounds each, plus her M4 carbine as backup. Whitmore was in position Bravo, a reinforced rooftop hide with overlapping view of the eastern approach. His voice came through the radio, nervous but controlled. Bravo set. I have good visibility on sectors 2 and 3. Copy Bravo, Kira responded. Maintain radio discipline. Call out only priority targets or threats I can't see. Roger. Mackenzie was in the communications tent, monitoring the enemy frequencies with sophisticated intercept equipment that had arrived with Chief Hale. Ghost, be advised, picking up increased radio traffic. Sounds like final coordination. Multiple call signs checking in. Copy, estimate time to contact. Based on movement patterns and last known positions, 15 to 20 minutes. Brennan's voice came over the command net, steady and calm. All positions, this is Sentinel 6. Hold fire until Overwatch engages or until they breach the wire. Conserve ammunition. Make every shot count. Overwatch has tactical control of the engagement. There were no protests, no questions, just acknowledgments from positions around the perimeter. The sun broke the horizon at 0542, golden light streaming across the valley, throwing long shadows from the mountains. And with the light came the enemy. Kira saw them through her scope, movement in the pre-dawn gray, professional fire teams advancing with discipline and tactical awareness. This wasn't the same force as 3 days ago. These fighters moved better, covered each other better, used terrain more effectively. The Wolf had learned from the first assault. They were attacking from 3 directions simultaneously. North Wall was clearly the main effort, with the heaviest concentration of fighters. East Wall was a supporting attack. South Wall looked like a feint, designed to pull defenders away from the primary breach points. Kira's mind processed the tactical picture in seconds, identifying priorities, calculating ranges, assessing threats. All stations, enemy contact imminent. Main effort North Wall, supporting attack east, feint south. Do not overcommit to the feint. Her voice was calm, professional, the voice of someone who'd done this before under far worse conditions. The first shots came from the enemy, small arms fire raking the north wall. Marines returned fire, controlled bursts, discipline holding. Kira identified her first target. DSHK heavy machine gun team, setting up 680 meters out, capable of shredding the defenses if it got into action. 680 meters distant, wind pushing 5 miles per hour from the southwest, temperature climbing to 51 degrees. Target crew stationary, assembling their weapon on a tripod mount. Breath in, breath out. Natural respiratory pause. Crosshair settled. Gentle pressure on trigger. The rifle bucked, the suppressor reducing but not eliminating the signature crack. Through the scope, she saw the gunner collapse. Immediate follow-up shot, 3 seconds later. Assistant gunner down before he could take over the weapon. The DSHK sat silent, useless, 2 bodies sprawled around it. Good hits! Good hits! Whitmore's voice, excited despite the situation. Second gun team moving into position, eastern approach, you're 11 o'clock. Kira shifted, acquired the new target, 520 meters out. The angle was different, Wind coming from a slightly different direction. Adjustments calculated automatically, unconsciously. Two more shots. Two more threats eliminated before they could bring devastating firepower to bear. The enemy mortar team was her next priority. The crew setting up behind a low ridge 700 meters north. If they got rounds in the air, the FOB's limited cover would mean casualties. Mackenzie, can you get counter battery on the mortar position? Working it. Give me 30 seconds. Kira didn't have 30 seconds. The crew was already dropping rounds down the tube. She fired. The crew chief dropped. Second shot, ammunition bearer. Third shot, gunner. The mortar fell silent before the first round had even impacted. Somewhere harmlessly in the empty desert south of the compound. Belay counter battery, she transmitted. Threat neutralized, but the enemy wasn't relenting. Through her scope, Kira saw something that made her blood run cold. Brennan was leading a counterattack. 14 Marines moving in disciplined formation toward a breach in the north wall where enemy fighters were attempting to plant explosives. It was the right tactical decision, the only way to prevent a catastrophic breach. But it put him in the open, exposed. Staff Sergeant, negative, Kira transmitted urgently. You're in the open. Too many angles. I can't cover. Ghost, we don't have a choice. North wall is about to collapse. We hold here or lose the FOB. Brennan's voice was calm, accepting. Do your job. I'll do mine. She wanted to argue, wanted to order him back, but he was right. The mathematics were brutal and simple. Then she saw it. 600 meters northeast, the enemy sniper. The same one who'd been hunting her. He'd shifted targets, recognizing the greater value. His barrel was swinging toward Brennan's exposed position. Kira ran the calculations in microseconds. Distance to enemy sniper, 590 meters. His distance to Brennan, 280 meters. Her bullet flight time at that range, 0.73 seconds. His bullet flight time, 0.38 seconds. She couldn't beat his shot. Physics wouldn't allow it. The enemy sniper was lining up a kill shot, center mass. Brennan would be dead before her round arrived. Unless the thought hit her like a physical blow, terrible and perfect. She could shoot Brennan first, non-lethal, drop him before the enemy's kill shot arrived. It was insane, shooting her own commander, court-martial offense, career ending, but he would be alive. Her crosshairs found Brennan, 430 meters, moving target. She'd have to lead him, account for his movement, pick exactly the right impact point. Left shoulder, away from heart, lungs, major arteries. Enough impact to drop him immediately. Margin of error, 3 inches either direction meant death. She had perhaps 2 seconds before the enemy sniper fired. Forgive me, Jonas, she whispered to the ghost of Brennan's son. I can't lose your father too. Breath in, breath out. Natural respiratory pause. Crosshair on Brennan's left shoulder, leading his movement by 18 inches. Gentle, perfect pressure. The M110 bucked. Through the scope, she saw Brennan drop like a stone, the impact spinning him. Marines around him scattered, confused, looking for the threat. 0.4 seconds later, exactly where Brennan's head had been, a bullet cracked past. The enemy sniper's kill shot, arriving into empty air. Chaos erupted on the radio. Man down! Staff Sergeant is hit! Who's shooting? Where's the fire coming from? Kira didn't pause. She shifted aim to the enemy sniper, saw him still in position, probably confused about why his target had dropped early. She fired 3 times in rapid succession. The third round found him. The counter-sniper threat was eliminated. All stations, this is Overwatch. Her voice was cold, controlled, cutting through the radio chaos. Enemy sniper Northeast Ridge had kill shot on Staff Sergeant Brennan. I dropped the Staff Sergeant first to save his life. Get him to cover. He's hit, but alive. Threat neutralized. Silence on the net as the implication sank in. She had shot her own commander to save him. In the aid station hastily set up behind cover, Brennan was being worked on by Torres. The bullet had passed cleanly through his left shoulder, missing bone, missing major vessels, missing everything critical by millimeters. Brennan was conscious, gritting his teeth against pain, but understanding was dawning in his eyes. The shot. That wasn't the enemy, was it? He asked Torres. The medic glanced at the wound angle, the precision of the placement, and understanding flickered across his face. No, Staff Sergeant, this was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Brennan keyed his radio with his good hand. Ghost, I understand what you did. Thank you. Kira's voice came back, tight with emotion she was barely containing. I couldn't lose another one, Staff Sergeant. Not you. Not Jonas's father. It was the first time she'd referenced the connection. The first time she'd let vulnerability show. Brennan's eyes filled. He understood the weight of that statement, the ghost she carried. Copy, Ghost. I'm good. Keep fighting. We finish this together. Roger. Chief Hale, monitoring the exchange from the TOC, stood in stunned silence. In 30 years of training snipers, evaluating thousands of shooters, he had never witnessed anything like what had just occurred. Shooting a moving friendly at over 400 meters. Intentional, non-lethal placement under combat stress. Timing it to beat an enemy's kill shot by fractions of a second. It wasn't just skill. It was a level of combat decision-making and marksmanship that redefined what he thought was possible. He keyed the command net. All stations, this is Hale. What Ghost just did will be studied in every sniper school for the next 50 years. She calculated an impossible solution to an unsolvable problem and executed it perfectly. That is the standard. The respect in his voice was absolute. Below, the battle was intensifying. Automatic weapons fire, the crump of RPGs impacting the wall, the sharp crack of grenades. The smell of cordite and burning beginning to rise even to her elevated position. But something was wrong. The enemy was adapting faster than she'd anticipated. They were actively hunting for her position now, recognizing that their command structure and heavy weapons were being systematically eliminated by precision fire. She saw scope glint from a position northeast, 620 meters out. Counter sniper. All stations, be advised, enemy sniper team active, northeast ridge. I'm relocating to position Charlie. She grabbed her rifle and moved, sprinting across the tower platform toward the ladder, toward the fortified position they'd prepared during the night. A bullet cracked past where her head had been 3 seconds earlier, impacting the metal tower with a sharp ping. Close. Too close. The enemy sniper was very good. This wasn't going to be as easy as the first battle. The Wolf had brought professionals this time, people who knew what they were doing, who could adapt and counter her tactics. Kira felt her heart rate spike for the first time, felt the cold touch of fear. But fear was just information. Fear meant respect for the enemy's capabilities. Fear kept you sharp. She reached position Charlie, a sandbagged corner position with overhead cover and multiple firing ports. Set up her rifle, scanned for the enemy sniper. Gone. He displaced the moment she moved. Professional tactics. This was going to be a different kind of fight. The battle raged on, and Kira settled into the rhythm of it. The terrible mathematics of modern warfare, choosing who lived and who died with every trigger press, carrying the weight of those choices because someone had to, and she'd been trained for exactly this burden. The sun climbed higher, and FOB Sentinel burned. Position Charlie provided better protection, but limited visibility. Kira could see the north and northeast approaches, but the eastern flank was a blind spot, a vulnerability she couldn't cover alone. The battle had been raging for 17 minutes, 17 minutes that felt like hours, each second stretched thin by adrenaline and focus. Through her scope, she tracked enemy movement patterns, identifying the command element by their distinctive communications gear and the way other fighters deferred to them. 3 officers, moving between covered positions, coordinating the assault with hand signals in radio calls. Priority targets. Kill the head, the body dies. She engaged the first officer. 540 meters to center mass. The wind had shifted, now pushing from the south. She compensated instinctively, sent the round downrange. He dropped immediately. The second officer, alerted by his comrade's fall, dove for cover but not fast enough. Kira's follow-up shot caught him mid-movement. The third officer was smarter. He'd already gone to ground, using a compound wall for hard cover. Patient. She could wait. Eventually he'd have to move, have to give her an angle. Ghost, taking fire from eastern approach. Brennan's voice, tight with stress. They're massing for a push on that sector. Kira couldn't see the eastern approach from her current position. She keyed the radio. Whitmore, I need eyes on eastern sector. What do you have? There was a pause, 2 seconds that felt eternal. Then Whitmore's voice came back, steadier than she'd expected. I count 40-plus fighters, moving in teams. They're using the irrigation ditches for cover, advancing on the eastern wall. 200 meters in closing. Can you call fire corrections? Another pause. Whitmore wasn't a trained spotter, had never done this under actual fire. Yes, I can do it. Talk me onto the lead element. I'll displace to a position where I can engage. Kira grabbed her rifle and moved to a different firing port, one with a narrow angle on the eastern approach. She couldn't see the targets yet, just smoke and dust in the compound walls. Lead element is behind the blue compound. You're 2 o'clock, 300 meters. Whitmore's voice finding its rhythm. They're preparing to cross open ground to the wall. Kira settled into position, rifle stable, breathing controlled. She still couldn't see them. I need them to move, Whitmore. I can't shoot what I can't see. Wait, movement! They're crossing now, heading for the wall breach. First team of 6, running low. Kira saw them the instant Whitmore called it. Shadows moving fast across open ground. Lead runner, carrying an RPG. That was the priority. 415 out, moving fast. She led him by a full body length, accounting for his speed and the angle of his run relative to her position. Beth out, trigger press. The runner tumbled, the RPG clattering away unused. Hit! Second team crossing now. 8 men, they're spreading out. Kira shifted aim, found the team leader by his position and the way he moved. Shot. He went down. The rest of the team scattered, their cohesion broken, their advance stalled. They're falling back to the ditch, Whitmore reported. Good shooting, Ghost. Keep eyes on. Call it if they try again. But even as she said it, her attention was drawn back to the north. The enemy wasn't giving up. They were regrouping, bringing up more fighters, more weapons. This wasn't like the first battle. They weren't breaking. They were adapting, learning, pressing harder. The wolf was living up to his reputation. 28 minutes into the engagement, Kira's rifle ran dry. She dropped the empty magazine, reached for a fresh one, and that's when the world exploded. Mackenzie's voice in her earpiece, tinny and distant through the ringing. Kira, status. She tried to respond, but her voice wouldn't work properly. Cleared her throat, spat dust and blood. I'm up, still in the fight. But something was wrong. Her right leg felt wet, warm. She glanced down without moving her head from the scope. Blood. Shrapnel from the mortar round had torn through her right calf. The fabric of her fatigues shredded, blood spreading dark against the tan material. The pain hadn't registered yet, blocked by adrenaline and training, but she could see the damage. It was bad. Ghost, you're bleeding, Whitmore's voice high with panic. I can see it from here. You need medical. Negative. Her voice was firm despite the copper taste in her mouth. North wall is about to break. I'm the only one with the angle on their staging area. She reached down with her left hand, still keeping her right hand on the rifle, and pulled a tourniquet from her kit. Apply 80, maybe 90 fighters, grouping behind a low wall, preparing to rush the north wall where the defenses were weakest, after 20-plus minutes of sustained fire. If they breached there, FOB Sentinel would be overrun. Simple mathematics. 73 defenders couldn't hold against those numbers in close quarters. "All units, danger close fire mission," she transmitted, her voice steadier than she felt. "Heavy concentration north wall staging area. I'm engaging now." She began firing methodically, ignoring the pain in her leg, ignoring the blood that had pooled around her boot, ignoring everything except the targets in her scope. Team leaders first, officers, anyone with a radio, anyone coordinating the assault. Her world narrowed to the simple rhythm. Acquire target, assess range and wind, breath control, trigger press, observe impact, next target. 4 down, 6 down, 8 down. The enemy assault wavered. Men started looking around for cover instead of preparing to advance. The momentum she'd been watching build for the last 5 minutes began to dissipate like smoke. "They're pulling back," Brennan's voice, disbelieving. "North wall, enemy is withdrawing." Kira saw it through her scope. The wolf had made the call, recognized that the assault was failing, that his command structure was being destroyed faster than he could replace it, that one wounded soldier in an elevated position was breaking his entire operation. Professional decision. Cut losses and withdraw rather than waste more fighters in a failed assault. She wanted to keep shooting, to punish them for coming here, for making her do this again, for pulling her back into the life she'd tried to leave behind. But they were retreating, no longer an immediate threat. She took her finger off the trigger, forced herself to breathe, to think instead of react. The battle wasn't over, but this phase was. She slumped back against the sandbags, suddenly aware of how much blood she'd lost, how pale her hands looked, how cold she felt despite the rising temperature of the morning. The rifle fell from her grip, and for the first time in years, Kira Vance let herself feel afraid. The medics reached her position 4 minutes later, led by Brennan despite his own injuries, despite the standing order that command personnel stay in the TOC during active engagements. He took one look at her leg, at the blood-soaked tourniquet, at her pale face, and his expression went hard. "Corpsman, get me a stretcher, now!" "Did we hold?" Kira asked, her voice weak, the words slightly slurred. Brennan knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "We held, because of you. Again." "Casualties?" "2 KIA, 7 wounded. You're the worst of the wounded." He looked at the tourniquet she'd applied one-handed. "You probably saved your own life with this. How long have you been sitting here bleeding?" "Don't know. Lost track of time." The corpsman arrived, a young specialist named Torres, who'd been through enough trauma to stay calm, even when he saw the extent of her injury. "Okay, Sergeant, we're going to get you out of here. This is going to hurt." "Not a sergeant," Kira mumbled. "You are now," Brennan said firmly. "Battlefield promotion. Effective immediately. Chief Hale and I agreed on it 5 minutes ago." They lifted her onto the stretcher, and the movement sent fresh waves of agony through her leg. She bit down on a scream, turned it into a grunt. As they carried her across the compound toward the aid station, she could see the aftermath of the battle. Smoke rising from a dozen fires, damaged buildings, shell casings littering the ground like brass rain. But the flag still flew. The FOB still stood. Whitmore appeared beside the stretcher, keeping pace, his face streaked with tears he wasn't bothering to hide. "I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for everything. You could have died because of what I did." Kira reached out with a shaking hand, gripped his wrist. "You did good today, Reed. Real good. Your calls were perfect. You saved lives. But we all carry scars, Reed. The question is what we do with them. You just answered that question." She let go, her hand falling back to the stretcher, her strength finally failing. The aid station was controlled chaos, wounded being triaged, supplies running low, the medical team working with a focused intensity of professionals pushed to their limits. They got her on a table, cut away what was left of her pant leg, Torres swore under his breath when he saw the full extent of the damage. This needs a surgeon, Staff Sergeant. Medevac to Bagram, stat. How long until the bird gets here? Brennan asked. 20 minutes if we're lucky. She's stable for now, the tourniquet is holding, but she's lost a lot of blood. They started an IV, began pushing fluids. Kira felt herself floating, disconnected, the pain becoming distant and abstract. She thought of Brooke, wondered if this was how it had felt, those last moments. Hoped it had been quick, hoped her friend hadn't suffered. Stay with us, Vance, Brennan's voice anchoring her. Don't you dare check out now. That's an order. Can't disobey orders, she mumbled, trying to smile. The helicopter arrived 18 minutes later, a Black Hawk with red crosses on the doors, beautiful and terrifying. They loaded her on, strapped her down, and the world became rotor noise and vibration. She looked up at the ceiling of the aircraft, at the medic working over her, checking vitals, adjusting the IV, doing all the things that kept people alive in transit. And then the morphine they'd given her kicked in fully, and the world went soft and dark and quiet. 72 hours later, Kira woke in a hospital bed at Bagram Air Base, her right leg elevated and wrapped in clean, white bandages that seemed impossibly bright after weeks of FOB dust. The room was clean, sterile, smelling of disinfectant and floor wax instead of cordite and diesel. It took her several moments to orient herself, to remember where she was and why. A nurse noticed her stirring, came over with a smile. Welcome back, Sergeant. You gave us a scare. What's the damage? Kira's voice was hoarse, her throat dry. Shrapnel through the gastrocnemius muscle. Missed the major vessels by about 6 millimeters, which is the only reason you still have that leg. Surgery went well. Full recovery expected in 8 to 10 weeks, though you'll need physical therapy. 8 to 10 weeks. It felt like a lifetime. Can I have water? The nurse brought her a cup with a straw, helped her sip slowly. The water was cold and clean and tasted better than anything Kira could remember. Over the next few hours, visitors came in steady rotation. Mackenzie brought books and magazines. Whitmore brought her rifle, cleaned and maintained with obsessive care, though she obviously couldn't take it with her yet. I re-zeroed it, he said quietly, setting it carefully in the corner. Had the armorer double-check my work. It's perfect. Thank you, Reed. It's the least I could do, the absolute least. He didn't stay long, too uncomfortable with hospitals and gratitude and emotions he didn't know how to process. Late in the afternoon, Brennan arrived with Chief Hale, both carrying folders and wearing expressions that mixed concern with something else. Pride, maybe. Respect. How are you feeling, Sergeant? Brennan asked, taking the chair beside her bed. Like I got hit by a mortar. Technically, you did. He set the folders on the bedside table. We have some paperwork for you, official business. Kira tried to sit up straighter, winced at the pull in her leg. The promotion to E5 is confirmed. Effective 3 days ago, the date of the battle. Silver Star with Valor device has been approved. Purple Heart for wounds received in action, and Bronze Star with Valor for the first engagement. He opened the first folder, showed her the orders. You don't have to accept the medals if you don't want them. I know some soldiers feel, I'll accept them, Kira said quietly. Not for me, for Brooke. She always said if you earn something, you honor it by accepting it, not by false modesty. Brennan nodded, understanding in his eyes. There's something else. He glanced at Hale, who took over. We'd like to establish a sniper training program here at Bagram, Hale said, his gravelly voice soft. Train the next generation of precision shooters. Pass on what you know to soldiers who need it. We want you to run it. Kira was quiet for a long moment, processing. I'm not sure I'm the right person for that, Chief. I'm barely holding myself together most days. That's exactly why you're the right person, Hale countered. Because you understand the cost. You understand what this job does to people. You won't train glory seekers. You'll train professionals. Brennan leaned forward. We want to call it the Hartley-Brennan Ghost Program, after your friend Brooke and after my son Jonas. They represent what we want every graduate to embody: excellence, sacrifice, and the courage to protect others. Kira's eyes filled with tears, the first time she'd cried in front of anyone since Brooke's funeral. They would have loved that, both of them. Is that a yes? Brennan asked gently. Yes, absolutely yes. On one condition. Name it. I stop hiding. I stop carrying guilt like it's my identity. I honor them by being the soldier they believed I could be, not by punishing myself. Brennan's own eyes were wet. I think that's what they'd want, what I know my son would want. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, three warriors who understood loss and duty and the strange alchemy that turned pain into purpose. That evening, after the visitors had gone, Whitmore returned, asked quietly if he could speak privately. The nurses left them alone, closing the door. He stood at the foot of her bed, fidgeting, clearly struggling with words. I need to formally apologize, he finally said. Not just for the rifle, but for everything. Every insult, every dismissal, every time I made you feel small. Reed, we've been through this. No, please, let me finish. He took a breath. I sabotaged you because you made me feel inadequate. Every day you were better than me at things that were supposed to be mine. Shooting, discipline, professionalism. And instead of rising to meet that standard, I tried to tear you down. His voice cracked. You could have died because of me. Everyone could have died. And you still gave me a chance to redeem myself. Still trusted me when I least deserved it. Kira studied him, saw genuine remorse, genuine change. What do you want, Reed? I want to be part of your program. When you start training snipers, I want to be a student. I want to learn how to be a professional like you. You want to be a sniper? I want to learn discipline, patience, how to be someone worth respecting instead of someone people tolerate because I'm loud. Kira considered this. The old Reed would never have admitted weakness, would never have asked for help. It's going to be hard, harder than anything you've done. I won't go easy on you just because we have history. I don't want easy. Easy is what made me into someone who sabotages people out of jealousy. I want hard. I want to earn it. Okay, you're in. But Reed, if you wash out, if you quit, there's no shame in it. This isn't for everyone. I won't quit. I promise you that. He left shortly after, walking with a lightness that hadn't been there before, unburdened by confession. The weeks blurred together, physical therapy sessions that were equal parts agony and progress, video calls with battalion command about the training program, curriculum development with Chief Hale, drawing on everything she'd learned in Ranger selection, everything Brooke had taught her, everything her grandfather had passed down. She walked without crutches after 4 weeks, ran a mile after 6, qualified on her rifle again after 7, though her legs still ached in cold weather, and probably always would. The scars, both visible and invisible, would stay with her. But she was learning that scars were just proof of survival. Proof that you'd face something terrible and come through the other side. 6 months later, the Hartley-Brennan Ghost Program accepted its first class of 8 students. 5 men, 3 women, all volunteers, all highly motivated. The new sniper range at FOB Sentinel had been built to specification. Long-range lanes stretching to 1,000 meters. Moving target systems. Simulation equipment that could replicate wind and temperature conditions from any environment. A sign at the entrance read, Hartley-Brennan Ghost Program, Excellence Through Discipline. Below it, photos of Sergeant Brooke Hartley and Lieutenant Jonas Brennan, both young and smiling, frozen in time before war took them. Sergeant Kiera Vance, now wearing the rank she'd earned, rather than the rank she'd hidden behind, stood before her first class. Precision shooting isn't about strength, she began, her voice carrying across the range. It's about control. Control of your breath, your mind, and your ego. The rifle doesn't care how big you are, how loud you are, or where you come from. It only cares about your discipline. She demonstrated an 800-meter shot, smooth and controlled, the impact visible through the spotting scopes exactly where she'd called it. The students were silent, awed. One of them, a young woman named Private First Class Davis, raised her hand hesitantly. "Sergeant, do you still get nervous before a shot?" Kira was honest. "Every single time. Fear keeps you sharp. Overconfidence kills. But I've learned that fear isn't weakness. It's information. It tells you that what you're doing matters, that the stakes are real. You use that fear, you don't let it use you." She had them run drills until lunch, pushing them hard but fairly, watching for signs of natural talent in areas that needed work. During the break, Mackenzie approached, now a sergeant himself and permanently assigned to the program as communications instructor. "The GHOST program is getting famous. Ranger School requested our curriculum. MARSOC wants to send observers. Brooke and Jonas's curriculum," Kira corrected automatically. "I'm just the instructor. You're more than that. You're proof." "Of what?" "That broken doesn't mean finished. That quiet can be strength. That size doesn't determine capability. That everyone deserves a second chance to be better than their worst moment." Whitmore, now a corporal and one of the program's assistant instructors, approached with the afternoon training schedule. "All rifles are cleaned and ready, Sergeant. Spotting scopes are calibrated. We're set for the afternoon session." Kira inspected his work, found it meticulous and professional. "Outstanding, Corporal. You've come a long way. Had a good teacher who believed in second chances," he said quietly, "even when I didn't deserve them." Later that afternoon, First Sergeant Brennan visited, walking the range with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the students work. "They're good," he observed. "You're building something important here." "We're building it," Kira corrected. "This isn't mine. It belongs to everyone who contributed, everyone who believed it was possible." They walked to the memorial wall that had been erected near the range, a permanent installation with photos and names of fallen soldiers from FOB Sentinel and beyond. Brooke's photo was there, Jonas's photo, and the 5 Marines who died defending the FOB during those 2 desperate battles. New plaques had been added. They gave tomorrow for our today. Kiera touched Brooke's photo gently. "We did it, Hermana. We're making warriors who think before they shoot, who understand the weight of what we do." Brennan touched his son's photo. "He'd be proud of you. Probably would have volunteered for your first class just to learn from you." "He taught me too, First Sergeant. In the time we served together, he showed me that leadership isn't about being the biggest or the loudest. It's about taking care of your people." They stood in companionable silence, 2 people who'd found purpose through loss, who'd turned pain into something that honored the dead by serving the living. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the range, the students completed their final drills of the day. Kira watched them pack their equipment with the care she'd insisted upon, the discipline that separated professionals from amateurs. A figure approached from the administration building, a young woman in fresh fatigues, nervous, clutching transfer orders. "Sergeant Vance, I'm Specialist Harper, Lindsay Harper. I'm supposed to report for the GHOST program. I'm scared I'm not good enough." Kira saw herself 18 months ago in those eyes. The same fear, the same doubt, the same potential. She smiled, genuine warmth in the expression. "What makes you think you're not good enough, Specialist?" "I'm small, quiet. People don't take me seriously." "Good. Let them underestimate you. It's an advantage if you're smart enough to use it." Kira gestured toward the range. "Come with me. Let's see what you're made of." They walked together toward the firing line, Kira's shadow long in the setting sun, merging with the shadows cast by Brooke and Jonas's photos on the memorial wall. Some shadows were cast by those we'd lost, others by those still standing. The best shadows were both, carrying the fallen forward while walking your own path. She'd been told she was too soft to be a warrior, too small, too quiet, too broken. They'd been right about one thing. She was soft enough to feel, to carry the weight of every decision, every life saved and lost. But she was also hard enough to endure, to stand when others fell, to make the impossible shots when everything depended on it. And she was wise enough now to know the difference, to understand that strength came in forms that couldn't be measured by physical size or volume of voice. The flag was lowered for the evening, the ceremony simple and profound. Kira and Brennan stood at attention, rendering salutes as the colors came down. When it was over, when the students had been dismissed and the range was quiet, Kira returned to her small office. On the desk sat Brooke's challenge coin, next to a range scorecard from that day's training. She picked up the coin, felt its weight, its warmth from sitting in the sun all day. "For you, Brooke," she whispered, "for Jonas, for everyone who believed I could be more than my fear. This is how I honor you, by helping others find their strength." She set the coin back down, next to a photograph that had been taken that afternoon. Her first class, all 8 students, standing with their rifles, faces serious and proud. The beginning of something important. The beginning of a legacy built not on size or volume, but on precision, discipline, and the quiet courage to face impossible odds. The Hartley-Brennan Ghost program would train 63 snipers over 4 years. 0 combat fatalities among graduates. Standards that made other schools study their methods. Sergeant Kira Vance served 9 more years before retiring to train federal law enforcement. She never gave interviews, never sought recognition. When a journalist once asked about her service, her only comment was, "The quietest warriors cast the longest shadows." Years later, she placed Brooke's challenge coin in the memorial display at the training facility. Next to it, a simple plaque. S.G.T. Brooke Hartley. She taught me that strength is carrying on when you want to quit. This program is her legacy. They'd said she was too soft, too small, too quiet. They'd been wrong about everything that mattered. The sun set on FOB Sentinel. A new generation of snipers prepared for the long watch, carrying forward a legacy built by small hands with steel resolve. The ghost had stopped hiding, and in revealing herself, she'd shown countless others they could be more than the world expected. That was the victory. Not battles won or enemies defeated, but lives transformed, potential unlocked, shadows cast forward into a future she helped create. Sergeant Kira Vance, the shadow they dismissed, had become the light guiding others through darkness. That legacy would outlive them all.